"Daddy?" Maya's voice cracked as she tugged his sleeve, her milkshake dripping onto the Manhattan pavement. "That girl? She looks just like me." Noah spun breath, catching as his eyes locked on a ragged child, rummaging through a trash bin, her face a mirror of his daughter's. Two identical little girls, one in silk, one in rags. How could that be? "Stay with us, this story will shake you." The afternoon light spilled golden over Central Park, turning the bare branches of winter trees into delicate sketches against the sky. Noah Harrington, billionaire tech visionary, walked slowly with his 6-year-old daughter Maya, her mittened hand swinging confidently in his. To the public eye, Noah was a man with everything wealth, power, influence. But to Maya, he was simply Dad, the one who carried her backpack when it got heavy, and bought her hot chocolate at the food carts near the Met. They had just stepped out from the museum where Maya had insisted on spending extra time in front of a painting of two sisters sitting by a window. She had pressed her nose close to the glass eyes, wide with curiosity. Now, as they crossed Fifth Avenue, her laughter rose like a bell above the noise of taxis and bus engines. "Dad," she whispered suddenly, tugging at his coat. Her tone had shifted. Noah stopped looking down at her flushed cheeks, expecting another question about art or the pigeons swirling overhead. But her eyes were fixed ahead, sharpened with something he had rarely seen in her confusion. "Don't be mad," she said softly, but that ugly look-alike just ate my pretzel from the trash. At first, the words almost made him chuckle. Children said such unfiltered things. But when his gaze followed the line of her mitten, the world around him seemed to narrow, the sounds of the city dimming into a hollow echo. A small girl crouched beside an overflowing trash bin, fingers digging through wrappers and half-eaten hot dogs. Her coat was torn, hanging from shoulders far too thin, and her hair fell in uneven tangles across her dirt-smeared face. Noah's instinct was to scold Maya gently for calling anyone ugly, but the correction died in his throat. Because when the girl lifted her head, his heart stopped. It was like looking at Maya's reflection in a broken mirror. Same almond-shaped eyes, the same slope of nose, the same small dimple that only appeared when she spoke. It was not a vague resemblance. It was identical down to the shade of brown in the irises. Maya, Noah murmured, crouching slightly so his daughter would hear the weight in his voice. "Sweetheart, we don't call people ugly." "I know," she whispered, not looking at him. "But she looks exactly like me." The girl had noticed them now. Her lips parted, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. For a long moment, the two children stared across the bustle of Fifth Avenue, as if caught in an invisible thread binding them together. Then, clutching something close to her chest, a grimy subway card sleeve with faded ink scrawled across it, she bolted. Noah's body acted before his mind could. He started forward, but Maya stepped too, and he reached to pull her back instantly. "Stay with me," he said sharply. His heart hammered in a way no boardroom confrontation or billion-dollar deal had ever provoked. He had faced down hostile takeovers, stood under the blinding lights of investor summits, but nothing had prepared him for this, a stranger's face carved into the likeness of his daughter. The girl's small frame weaved through pedestrians past a violinist playing a trembling melody near the corner. Taxi horns blared as she darted across the street and down the yawning mouth of the 59th Street Columbus Circle subway station. The music faltered mid-note as the violin string snapped with a sound like gunfire. Dad, Maya cried, breath fogging in the cold. "If she looks like me, does that mean she's ours?" Noah gripped her hand, unable to answer. The subway swallowed the girl, her silhouette vanishing into the shadows of the underground, leaving only the word scribbled on the sleeve he had glimpsed for a heartbeat. Ellis. He could barely breathe. The cold air seared his lungs. He forced a smile for Maya, though his stomach felt as if the ground beneath them had dropped away. "We'll figure this out," he said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. They stood there for a moment, father and daughter, one bewildered by innocence, the other shaken by a terror he couldn't name. Around them, life in Manhattan flowed on undisturbed shoppers juggling glossy bags, joggers cutting through traffic, a horse-drawn carriage rattling over the pavement. To everyone else, it was just another winter afternoon in New York. But to Noah, the city had cracked open, revealing a mystery that made his carefully ordered life suddenly fragile. He led Maya back into Central Park, trying to calm his racing mind. She skipped at his side, still processing what she had seen, repeating softly, "She looked like me dad." She really did. Each repetition struck him harder than the last. By the time they reached Bethesda Terrace, Noah's chest ached. He lowered himself onto the stone steps, lifting Maya into his lap. She leaned against him, her small body warm through layers of wool. For a moment he let the comfort steady him. He thought of his late wife, how she had once stood right here laughing with him, how their lives had felt whole. The memory cut deep now. He stared at the rippling reflection of the terrace in the fountain's water. Two swans glided past their mirrored images, stretching and breaking on the surface. Twins, he thought suddenly, though he immediately shook the idea away. Impossible, absurd, and yet the word Ellis burned in his mind. What was it? A name, a place, a coincidence too sharp to ignore? Maya tilted her face up toward him. "Dad, are we going to find her?" Noah kissed her forehead, but his voice wavered. "Yes, love, we're going to try." Inside, he wasn't sure if it was a promise he could keep, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The look in that girl's eyes, the uncanny resemblance, the silent plea that had passed between the two children, it wouldn't let him rest until he found her again. For the first time in years, Noah Harrington, the man who thought he had everything under control, felt utterly unmoored. He tightened his arm around Maya, staring out across the park where the city's noise seemed distant now. Somewhere beneath the streets, another child with his daughter's face was running, and whatever truth lay at the end of that chase, he could no longer turn away. The following morning, New York woke under a pale gray sky, and Noah Harrington moved through it as though he carried a secret too heavy for anyone else to see. He had hardly slept, haunted by the sight of that girl disappearing into the subway. Maya had fallen asleep quickly, whispering once more that the child had looked just like her. But for Noah, every time he closed his eyes, he saw two faces staring at each other across the chaos of Fifth Avenue reflections that should not exist. By the time he arrived at his office tower in Midtown, he had already made up his mind. This was not something he could push aside or rationalize away. He had built his empire on the principle that every problem had a solution if you were willing to trace the pattern back to its source. Now the puzzle was not a failing company or a shaky merger, it was his own family, and the stakes were infinitely higher. He called his head of security first. Victor was efficient, discreet, used to dealing with high-profile threats. But when Noah explained what he wanted, surveillance pulled from nearby stores, outreach to social services, anything that could locate a homeless child, Victor hesitated. "Sir," he said cautiously, "this isn't a corporate threat. This is a child on the street. We can't handle it like an operation." "I'm not asking you to handle it like an operation," Noah snapped, then lowered his tone. "I'm asking you to use the resources we have. I need to know who she is, and I need to know soon." Victor agreed, though reluctantly, and Noah knew he would treat the matter carefully. Still, he also understood this went beyond security. It was personal, and it demanded a kind of approach his empire had never needed before. That was why before noon he found himself sitting in the quiet office of a case manager from a small non-profit he supported through his foundation. The woman's name was Janine, a trauma-informed social worker with eyes that revealed she had seen far too many lost children. Noah explained as best as he could a girl about 6, dirty, hungry, and identical to his daughter. Janine did not laugh or dismiss him. She only nodded slowly, scribbling notes, then asked the kinds of questions Noah had not been prepared for. Did the child look malnourished? Did she show signs of being coached by an adult? Was there anyone nearby watching her? Noah answered as honestly as he could, replaying every moment, realizing how much he had missed in the shock of recognition. Later that afternoon, Victor returned with a grainy piece of footage from a security camera at a Duane Reade pharmacy not far from Columbus Circle. It showed the girl leaving the store with a woman in a hospital volunteer's smock, her hand briefly clasped in the woman's before they vanished into the crowd. Noah's pulse quickened. This wasn't random. Someone had been with her, even if only for a moment. But who and why a hospital uniform? He called in another favor, this time from a journalist friend who owed him for an old tip. Within hours, Noah had confirmation of something he already suspected. 5 years ago, a fire had gutted the basement archive of Roosevelt Children's Hospital, one of the oldest in Manhattan. Many neonatal records from that year were gone, including birth certificates, logs, and medical charts. The official story was faulty wiring, but rumors of negligence and cover-up had swirled for years. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. Maya had been born at Roosevelt 5 years ago, and now a girl identical to her appeared on the streets clutching a subway sleeve with the word Ellis scrawled across it. It could not all be chance. Noah's next step was a visit to the hospital itself. He walked through the glass doors of the lobby, feeling for the first time in years like an intruder rather than a benefactor. He had donated millions to the institution in memory of his late wife. Plaques on the wall bore his name. Yet, as he moved past reception and into the hushed corridors, he felt no pride, only a gnawing dread that something essential had been hidden from him all these years. He asked for archives for staff who had been there the night his daughter was born. At first, he met resistance. Records had been lost and the fire employees had retired or moved on. But persistence, and perhaps the weight of his name, opened a door at last. An administrator whispered about a nurse still working part-time in the maternity ward who remembered things others had chosen to forget. Her name was Donna Hayes. She had been there the night of the fire. She had been there the night Maya was born. Noah left the hospital, shaking his hands trembling, as he pushed open the heavy glass doors to the cold air outside. He could not stop thinking of the woman in the volunteer smock, the fire that had erased so much the identical face that had stared back at Maya. Each fragment felt like a thread in a tapestry he had not known existed, and now he was pulling them loose one by one, unable to stop. Janine's warning echoed in his ears. When you dig into the past, be prepared for what you'll find. Sometimes the truth isn't what we hope. That night, after Maya had fallen asleep with her favorite stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm, Noah stood alone in his penthouse study overlooking the glittering city. He should have felt powerful here, surrounded by the empire he had built, the skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass. But instead, he felt small, consumed by questions, without answers. Who was the girl? Why had she looked so much like his daughter? And what had really happened in that hospital 5 years ago? His phone buzzed with a new message from Victor. Attached was a still frame pulled from the Duane Reade footage. The girl's face was turned toward the camera just enough to see her expression, fear, hunger, and something else Noah recognized all too well. Determination. Clutched to her chest was the subway sleeve. Victor had enhanced the image, and now the word was clear. Ellis. Not smudged, not fading. Sharp and deliberate. Noah sat down heavily at his desk, staring at the image. Ellis. It could be a surname, a first name, or a clue to something larger. He thought of Ellis Island, the symbol of arrivals, of new beginnings of families divided and reunited. Was it possible that the girl's fragment of belonging pointed to something that connected directly to his own? He pressed his palms to his face, the city lights blurring through his fingers. When he finally lowered his hands, he knew one thing. The past was not finished with him. It had been waiting quietly beneath the surface of his carefully constructed life. Now it was rising thread by thread, pulling him back to the night his world had changed forever. And he was beginning to fear that what he uncovered might not only explain the girl on the street, but also unravel everything he thought he knew about his daughter. The winter morning broke over Manhattan in muted tones of silver and ash, the kind of sky that seemed to press heavy against the skyline. Noah Harrington moved through the city with the urgency of a man unwilling to let go of a mystery, no matter how deep it cut. The image of the girl, Aria, as he had come to call her in his thoughts, haunted him, and every instinct told him that the truth lived somewhere in the shadows of that hospital, and the night Maya was born. The search took him first to the archives at Ellis Island. At a glance, it seemed absurd. What could a relic of immigration history have to do with a child on Fifth Avenue? Yet the word scrawled on the subway sleeve had burrowed into him. When he stepped off the ferry and entered the echoing Great Hall, the enormity of the place overwhelmed him. Names of families etched in bronze. The whisper of generations who had arrived, searching for a beginning. He felt a tremor inside as he studied the immigrant registry, half expecting to find something that would tie his life to this place. In the quiet of the archives, he came upon a card tucked into a file of museum memorabilia. It wasn't a name, it wasn't a record. It was a souvenir, a child's card from the Ellis Island gift shop designed to mimic the historic entry cards immigrants once carried. On the back, in handwriting, almost too neat for a child, was the name Ellis. Noah's breath caught. This wasn't random. That scrap the girl had clutched to her chest had once belonged in a hospital bassinet bag. His mind spun as he recalled Maya's birth night, how chaotic it had felt even then, and how quickly everything had become sealed in silence. Armed with this clue, Noah traced back through ambulance logs and staff rosters. Roosevelt Children's had been stretched thin the night of March 15th. 2 babies had been born close together in the early hours, both female, both noted as small but stable. Yet only one official record had survived the fire. The other vanished as if she had never existed. The turning point came when he confronted Donna Hayes, the retired nurse he had been told about. They met, not in an office, but in the vaulted chamber of Vanderbilt Hall at Grand Central Terminal, a place chosen because of its anonymity and its noise. Travelers hurried by with suitcases. The air smelled faintly of roasted chestnuts from a vendor outside. Donna was pale, her hands trembling as she twisted them together in her lap. When Noah showed her the photo of Aria, her composure broke. Tears welled in her eyes, and she whispered, "She looks like Maya," just as they did that night. Noah leaned forward, his voice steady but edged with desperation. "Tell me what happened." And then she did. 2 births, 1 night. Identical girls who had slipped into the world minutes apart. But their mother, Noah's late wife, had been cold distant, insisting she could not care for both. Donna admitted she had been pressured, threatened, even to take one of the infants away to place her elsewhere quietly. At the same time, another young woman on a lower floor, Sarah Chen, had delivered a stillborn child. Broken by grief, she had been given the surviving twin under the guise of divine mercy. Donna's voice shook as she said it. "Your wife told me no one must ever know. She signed papers. She made me swear, and I obeyed." Noah felt the weight of her words crush down upon him. He remembered the strangeness of that night, the way his wife had turned her face from him, how she had refused to speak of the birth afterward. He had convinced himself it was exhaustion, trauma. But now the truth slashed through him. He had not brought home one daughter that night. He had left with half of his family never knowing the other existed. He stumbled out of Grand Central into the swirl of snow that had begun to fall. The city blurred around him, headlights streaking across wet pavement. He pressed his back against the stone wall, gasping, his chest heavy with grief and rage. How could she have hidden this? How could a system built on care for the most vulnerable have allowed it? Yet, as much as anger surged, another feeling rose stronger: resolve. Arya was not gone. She was alive right here in his city, scraping by in the shadows. She was his blood as much as Maya. The universe had delivered her to him once already in that chance encounter outside the Met. He would not let her vanish again. That night, with Maya tucked in bed, Noah sat in his study staring at two photographs side by side, one of Maya smiling in the park, one of Arya frozen in the Duane Reade footage. The likeness was undeniable, but beyond the features there was something deeper, something he could not name. It felt as though his family had been split apart 5 years ago, and fate was stitching it back together thread by thread. His phone buzzed on the desk. A message from the lab technician he had quietly contracted earlier in the week after obtaining Arya's discarded juice bottle from the pharmacy footage trail. DNA results had returned. He opened the message, his pulse thundering. The words glowed on the screen, 99.999% match. Noah dropped his face into his hands, the tears hot against his palms. Relief, devastation, and awe collided all at once. There was no more room for denial. Arya was his daughter, Maya's twin. The truth he had been chasing through fragments of archives, through whispers of hospital corridors, was no longer speculation. It was fact etched in the code of their very cells. He looked out at the Manhattan skyline, shimmering under the night snow. The city seemed different now, colder, sharper, yet also filled with a possibility he could hardly describe. 2 births one night. 2 daughters separated by choices that were never his, now waiting for him to choose what kind of father he would be. He knew the path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, clarity cut through the chaos. He would not stop until both his daughters stood in the light of his home where they belonged. Snow still clung to the gutters of the Upper East Side when Noah Harrington brought Arya home for the first time. The drive from the shelter had been quiet, the city wrapped in the hush of early evening headlights glowing like lanterns in the mist. In the rearview mirror, he caught glimpses of her small wherry, clutching a plastic bag of meager belongings. She did not speak, but her eyes never stopped moving, as though memorizing every turn, every streetlight, in case she needed to find her way back. When they arrived, the Harrington townhouse loomed warm against the winter night windows, glowing amber. Maya was already waiting at the door, her curls bouncing as she pressed her nose to the glass. She flung the door wide the moment she saw them, her voice carrying through the cold. She came. She really came. Arya froze on the threshold, snowflakes melting into her tangled hair. For a moment, she seemed about to retreat, the grandeur of the house pressing down like a weight. But then Maya stepped forward, bare feet on the hardwood, and simply held out her hand. "Come inside. I saved you a place." Something shifted. Arya's shoulders eased just enough for her to cross the doorway. Noah guided her in gently, his heart pounding as though the fragile act of stepping into this home might shatter everything. Dinner had been laid out, a table set not for 2, but for 3. It was a small gesture, but for Arya it was monumental. She slid into her chair awkwardly, glancing around as if afraid to touch the silverware. Maya chattered brightly, filling the silence with stories from school, her excitement spilling like light across the table. And slowly, as the warmth of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes filled the air, Arya reached for her fork. Noah watched her eat each bite, taken with a reverence that broke him. She chewed slowly, almost as though memorizing the taste. When Maya pushed half her roll toward her and whispered, "You can have mine," Arya blinked hard, swallowing more than food. Later, the girls sat cross-legged on the rug in the living room, toys scattered around them. Maya pulled out her favorite dollhouse and placed two identical dolls inside. "This one's you," she said, pushing a figure with brown hair toward Arya. "And this one's me. We're sisters, so we live here together." Arya's small hand hovered over the doll before finally taking it. She moved it into the tiny painted bedroom, arranging it beside Maya's. "Sisters," she repeated softly as though testing the word. Noah stood at the doorway, his chest tightening. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times in sleepless nights, but reality was far more powerful. Two children who had been separated by silence and lies now building a world together out of painted wood and plastic. Bath time revealed another kind of tenderness. Maya insisted on lending Arya her strawberry shampoo, giggling when the bubbles slipped down her arm. For the first time, Arya laughed a sound so delicate it seemed to tremble in the air. It was a laugh that belonged to a child, not the survivor Noah had met, crouched by a trash bin. That night, he tucked them into beds side by side, Maya in her room, Arya in what had once been the guest room, now freshly made with lavender sheets and a nightlight glowing against the dark. He lingered in the doorway, listening as Maya whispered stories to her sister until both the voices faded into sleep. Noah returned to his study, the fire crackling low. On the mantel above hung a new photograph, the three of them in Central Park, captured by a street photographer the weekend before. In it, Arya's smile was hesitant but real. Maya's was radiant, and his own held something he hadn't seen in years, peace. The city outside continued its restless pulse, sirens, car horns, laughter spilling from late-night diners, but within the townhouse there was a stillness Noah hadn't known since before loss had hollowed him. He sat in the quiet, realizing the truth of what was forming under his roof. They were no longer two. They were three. And though the road ahead was uncertain, though the past still hung over them, with unanswered questions and wounds yet to heal, Noah knew this for the first time his family was whole. The weeks that followed unfolded like a season of learning how to breathe again. For years, Noah Harrington had measured life in balance sheets and market predictions, but now each day was measured in small, fragile victories. A child's laugh at the breakfast table, two sisters braiding each other's hair in the afternoon, like the rhythm of belonging settling into the air of the townhouse. Still, beneath the warmth, the past pressed like a bruise. Truth could not be buried, not when its shadow had already touched every corner of their lives. Arya was adjusting, though she still carried habits that spoke of hunger and uncertainty. She saved half her toast wrapped in a napkin, slipped extra pencils into her backpack at school, as though tomorrow might bring scarcity. When Noah gently told her she no longer needed to do that, she nodded. But the next day he found another stash hidden under her pillow. It wasn't mistrust, it was survival, and he knew survival could not be erased in a week or a month. What mattered was showing her every day that home meant permanence. Maya, too, wrestled with questions her young mind could hardly frame. One evening she asked if their mother had known about Arya. The innocence in her tone nearly broke Noah. He crouched to meet her eyes, explaining that sometimes adults made choices they should never make, and sometimes children paid the price. Maya's lips pressed together, her little brow furrowed. "But we'll keep her now, right?" she whispered. He pulled her close voice steady with a vow that reached beyond words. "Forever. She's ours. She always was." The city outside their lives seemed intent on reminding him that not all stories ended with such chances. On the subway, he saw children without coats sleeping against their mothers on plastic benches. At Grand Central, he passed men and women who clutched everything they owned in plastic bags. Each sight struck him differently now. Before, they had been background noise to a busy life. Now, every face felt connected to Arya's as if she carried all their struggles in her fragile frame. One Saturday, he brought both girls to the Frick collection. The galleries were hushed, filled with portraits of families painted centuries ago. He watched as Maya tugged Arya to stand in front of a canvas where two sisters posed side by side, their hands linked, their eyes bright with shared secrets. "That's us," Maya declared. Arya tilted her head, staring long and hard, before nodding the faintest smile curving her lips. Noah swallowed hard, knowing she saw herself for the first time, not as an outsider, but as part of something whole. Not everyone embraced this transformation. Whispers circulated in the Upper East Side community, sharp-edged gossip wrapped in polite smiles. At a parent-teacher gathering at Maya's school, he overheard murmurs about the Harrington girl and the stray he brought in. He stood taller, answering questions with calm authority, his daughters at his side. In the chess circle at Central Park, where he had once found quiet solitude, he placed Arya across from him at the table. As she studied the pieces with furrowed concentration, old men leaned in, teaching her moves with patience. "You think two queens can't belong on the same board?" One laughed kindly, placing a second queen beside hers. Noah caught his breath at the metaphor. The weight of secrets still demanded reckoning. He could not raise his daughters in the shadow of silence. That truth led him back to Donna Hayes, the nurse whose confession had unraveled everything. They met again, this time not in secrecy, but in the open air along the High Line where families strolled among gardens, blooming against steel and glass. Donna's face was lined with guilt. "You don't owe me forgiveness," she whispered. "But those girls, they deserve light, not lies." Noah nodded. "They will have light, and they will know everything when the time is right. But I needed you to understand you gave me back what I lost. For that, I can't hate you." Tears streaked down her cheeks as she pressed a worn rosary into his hand. He kept it not for its faith, but for what it symbolized, the choice to remember rather than erase. At home, he began telling stories at bedtime, weaving fragments of truth into tales that his daughters could carry gently. He told them about strength hidden in small places, about families broken and mended, about sisters who found each other when the world least expected it. Maya listened with bright eyes. Arya listened with a stillness that was its own kind of hunger. When he finished, she whispered, "That's us, isn't it?" He kissed her forehead. "Yes, love. That's you." The photograph in the living room became a center point of their days. Captured in the park, all three of them pressed close together, it seemed to watch over the house like a guardian. Visitors noticed it, first thing, some with admiration, others with curiosity they dared not voice aloud. For Noah, it was a daily reminder of what he chose to keep, not the empire he had built or the wealth piled beneath his name, but the fragile miracle of two daughters who laughed together in the kitchen, argued over board games, and fell asleep under the same roof. Spring came to the city, washing away the last crusts of snow. One Sunday, Noah led them both back to Ellis Island, not for archives or answers, but to give them a piece of their story they could touch. The great hall echoed with footsteps. The river beyond glittered under the sun. They stood together before a wall of names. "This is where so many families began," he told them. "And this is where ours began again." Maya reached for Arya's hand without hesitation. Arya squeezed back her shoulders straighter than he had ever seen them. Together, they placed a small bouquet at the base of the wall, a tribute not to loss, but to survival. On the ferry ride back, the girls leaned against each other, hair tangled by the wind. Noah stood behind them, the city rising before them like a promise. He thought of everything he had uncovered the fire, the lies, the cruelty of choices made in secrecy, and felt no need to hide from it anymore. The past had carved scars, yes, but scars were proof of healing. What mattered now was what they built forward. That evening, they held a small dinner in the garden of their townhouse, inviting neighbors, teachers, and friends. Tables were lined with dishes from every family who came, a potluck that shimmered with the diversity of the city itself. Arya carried a tray of lemonade, shy at first, then smiling when children her age asked her to join a game of tag. Maya darted after them, calling her name like she had always belonged. As dusk fell and lanterns lit the garden in warm hues, Noah raised a glass. He did not speak of wealth or legacy. He spoke of family, of the miracle of second chances, of choosing to keep what the world too often discards. His voice shook, but his words carried steady across the night. This is what matters. This is what lasts. Later, when the guests had gone and the garden was still, he found his daughters sitting on the steps together, fireflies flickering around them. Maya leaned her head against Arya's shoulder. Arya whispered something he couldn't hear, but Maya laughed softly in reply. The sound was light, certain, unburdened. Noah stood at the doorway, the rosary Donna had given him, warm in his pocket, the photo in the living room, waiting to greet him when he turned back inside. For the first time in years, the future no longer felt like a calculation of gains and losses. It felt like a gift, fragile, extraordinary, and whole. And as he watched his daughters side by side, he knew this with absolute clarity. The world had tried to divide them, but he would spend the rest of his life keeping them together. What they had lost could not be undone. But what they chose, to keep, the laughter, the belonging, the unbreakable bond, was theirs forever. The city never forgot what happened to the Harrington family, but for Noah, Maya, and Arya, it wasn't about headlines or whispers. It was about rediscovering what it meant to be whole. What began as a chance encounter outside the Met had grown into a story of two sisters finding each other after 5 years apart, and a father who learned the deepest truth of all family is not defined by wealth, by comfort, or by the silence of secrets. It is defined by the courage to love, protect, and repair what was broken. Noah's empire had once been built on profits and deals, but in the quiet of his home, the real empire revealed itself. Two little girls who laughed on the floor surrounded by crayons and dolls, who argued over bedtime stories, who hugged fiercely as though afraid to ever be separated again. He had uncovered painful truths, faced betrayal, and carried the weight of choices he never made. Yet, in the end, what mattered most was that he chose differently. He chose to keep both daughters, to embrace their bond, to rebuild his family stronger than before. For the audience, the lesson is clear. Life will test us with unfairness, with scars left by others' mistakes, and with secrets that seem too heavy to bear. But our choices today can reshape the future. We cannot change the night of the fire, the lies told in hushed hospital corridors, or the years lost to silence. But we can choose how to respond when truth finally reveals itself. We can choose forgiveness over resentment, action over denial, and above all, love over fear. Applied to our own lives, this means daring to face the truths we'd rather avoid, acknowledging the hidden struggles around us, and remembering that family isn't only about blood, it's about showing up for those who need us, even when it's hard. Like Noah, we may not always have the power to erase the past, but we always have the power to build a better present and a stronger tomorrow. So, if this story touched your heart, if you believe in second chances, in the resilience of children, and in the unbreakable power of love, join us. Subscribe to the channel, support our journey, and help us bring more stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of the beauty we can create together. Your support is the reason we can keep telling stories that matter.